This presentation is about two Eagle Ski Club expedition trips, both done to the Kluane National Park, which is up in the Yukon in Canada. So what we've got is a Mount Steele trip from 2019 and a Mount Logan trip from 2016. Now, because a lot of it is pretty similar, they go together quite nicely. And I'm actually going to start with the second trip, Steele, because we didn't get anywhere very interesting, whereas on Logan, we were actually successful. So on both of these, to get up here, you fly your team into Vancouver from wherever. Then everybody flies up from Vancouver to Whitehorse. From Whitehorse, you've got a couple of hours drive to a small airstrip. And then they fly you into this astonishing ice field, the Kluane National Park, which I think is supposedly the biggest ice field outside of the Arctic and Antarctic or something like that. But anyway, it's pretty impressive. It's right up there on the border with Canada, close to the Denali region. So this is what it looks like when you start. Everybody turns up with a lot of ski bags and a lot of luggage. Quite how you approach a trip like this depends where you come from. So if we take what skis you choose to bring with you, if you are Canadian, as Matt is, you are bringing nice, big, fat, beefy skis. If you are British, you have brought your best little super skinny, super lightweight ski touring skis. Both of them work. How much other equipment you need, again, depends. If you are Canadian, like Matt is, some shorts and your baseball cap is quite sufficient. If you are British, you have brought your 8,000 meter Gore-Tex down jacket. Either way, what you are going to need to do is start sorting a whole lot of food and fuel. Everything goes onto those little planes, and there is absolutely no resupply once you've left Whitehorse. So this is planning out days of food rations while we wait for our chance to move across to the landing strip. Couple of hour drive. One of the reasons why the mountains I'm about to talk about, you've probably never heard of them if you're not kind of into Canada. They're in this block of ice field, and you can't see them. It's not like Denali. There isn't some stunning view from the road where you can take great photographs. You drive along, and there's just no sign that out there are mountains that are almost 6,000 meters high. Even when you get to the little airstrip, and this is it, it's a single dirt strip airstrip next to this lake, there's still really no sign that there are 8,000 meter mountains out there somewhere. This is the process of getting started waiting for your flights. Weight matters. The planes are tiny. They are flying very low. They're flying lower than the highest mountains. They're weaving between them, not going over them. So they will weigh all your gear and you fully dressed in your ski kit. And once they've got the weights worked out, you start waiting. Because even when the weather is good at the airstrip, the cloud can sit in over that ice field, and you could wait for hours. Frankly, you could wait for days. That's just how it goes. And the waiting is more complicated because they can only fly 2 skiers per flight. So it's actually possible to get your team caught stranded halfway between the airstrip and your landing site. As soon as they get a word that they think they might be able to get a flight in, you're piling out onto the strip, into this plane. As you can see, wheels when it's here and skis when it lands on the glacier. In you pile, tiny plane, one in the front, one in the back. Your pilot and you head off into the ice field. Now, this is an ice field where people have, not what I wanted to do, where people have at various times gone in or come out on the ice field on foot. I think maybe you should have done that 40 years ago, because as you fly in, the first thing you see is a great deal of what looks frankly like silt and mud. So that's going to take you a day or two of hiking if you choose to do this on foot. And then as you come closer in, this is looking at the edge off one of the mountains, there's just a whole lot of moraine. You are going to have some very long slog along the moraine banks on the sides of glaciers before you get close to the airfield, to the ice field. So frankly, I recommend taking the plane, because the ice field is magnificent. It's astonishing. I mean, I haven't been to Antarctica, so I've kind of never seen ice this big. When you're up there, it's actually quite deceptive. Your mind keeps thinking, oh no, I'm seeing cloud with mountains coming through it. And it's like, no, you're not. You are seeing the ice field. The distances between these peaks are just astonishing. And they bring you into some little piece of snow somewhere and dump you there. Normally well away from your actual mountain. They don't want to have to land too high. And obviously they want to be somewhere where they think there are minimal crevasses. So you pretty much get dropped off in your little plane, and that's that. You're on your own until you call them back in using a satellite phone or an inReach. Whether they can come and get you, of course, depends on what the weather is doing. So there's no sort of instant way of getting back out of this place. Once you're in, of course, you then got to wait for the rest of your team to get flown in and hope the weather doesn't change while you wait. And the first thing you do on arrival is make yourself somewhere to stay tonight and bury a cache of food, because it is entirely possible that the plane will not be able to come when you want it, and you may be sitting there for a couple of days. So have some spare food available at your landing site. And the next thing we need to do is start to move, because this is very flat. It's not what we came for. So we did two slightly different things on the two trips. And on this one, we skied. Obviously, there's more gear than we can carry just in rucksacks. So we are making, I don't know what you'd call them, tow bag pulks, if you like. This brand called Overboard, they do an incredibly tough dry bag. The 40-liter one is just perfect for this. It gives you a really good towing container. I don't know what to call it. And you would normally have it on a metal swivel so that the bag can roll. So once we've got that packed up, we start to move ourselves towards the mountain we're actually interested in trying to climb. This is all glacial terrain. So we are skiing rope together. You can see the little knots in the ropes. Give a little more grab if somebody does go into a crevasse. And the dry bags being pulled behind each person, combination of a rucksack and a dry bag to move your gear. They are still a pain. As soon as you're on a slope with a camber, the damn thing is sliding off with gravity down on one side, and you're kind of forever pulling it at an awkward angle on slopes. Skiing with them, how to come back down is awkward. Some people manage to put their turns in without getting too trapped by the bag behind them. Other people take the shopping bag approach, put more weight into your rucksack and just pick up the bag in your hand and ski down like that. A lot depends how steep it is. If it's steep, you might want to get it away from chasing the back of your skis. It all takes a bit of working out kind of what works for you. As we set out along the glacier, generally you're doing two things potentially. As you make your way towards a mountain, wanting to be able to get back to the landing strip where the plane will meet you, you may well want to put up wands. So those are those canes with the little orange flags. That's a way of marking the route that you've taken along the glacier, which among other things is maybe the route you've decided to take through a crevasse field. What we sometimes did was you might go out for a day ski with some gear, bury it somewhere as a cache, ski back, and then the next day move your camp to that new site. If you're going to do that, you absolutely want to take a GPS waypoint of where you buried that cache of gear, because although most of these photographs show sunshine, and we did have some lovely weather, it can turn into this fairly quickly. And you're just in the inside of a golf ball. You've lost everything. Your mountains, your directions, your sense of up. You want those wands to find your way home, and you want those GPS waypoints to make sure you get to the cache or the camp that you're looking for. When it comes to setting up a camp, there are crevasses. So the first thing we're going to do, still roped up, is work out the area we want to pitch the tents in, and then go round probing it with our avalanche probes to try and ensure that we've found ourselves a safe spot before we unrope and get off our skis. In two trips, the Mount Steele trip, the Mount Logan trip, we only ran into an avalanche once. We were skiing back down off a peak, so not roped up, and Jack did that unfortunate thing. He skied the pitch, he turned to do the hockey stop and stopped directly on top of the crevasse. So the snow bridge broke. He didn't fall into it completely. He managed to do the crucifix arms thing, and we got to him, threw him a rope and pulled him back out fairly quickly. So no harm done. But they are out there. So they always need to be in the back of your mind. This is one of our camps, dug in. In two trips and quite a lot of tent digging, I don't know that we ever got this right. I mean, you dig walls and trenches and stuff to try and protect you from the wind, and you try and work out where the wind's coming from. And overnight, the wind simply changes direction. The bad weather comes in. The walls and trenches just become containers for all the snow that is now falling. And you get out there and shovel it. So I don't know whether we would have been better off if we hadn't had the walls of protection. I don't know. You probably need a real Canadian to answer that one. We did have some fairly ferocious wind. Overall, I think the weather was not as bad as the Yukon is known for, or as might have been true 2 decades ago. We had quite a lot of pretty decent days, but we did have howling wind. We did have some spectacular wind brine collecting on the skis. As you can see in these photographs, we did our days and nights of having to dig out the tent as the snow continues to fall. We are using Hilleberg tents, super strong, sturdy Arctic tents. These are nice big tents. We're sleeping 3 people per tent, which is fairly comfy. You can get 4 into them if you have to, and they're big enough that all 6 people can sit in one tent and have a discussion, which is actually really important when it comes to trying to do planning in bad weather. The joy of the very cold temperatures up in the Yukon, your breath will freeze inside the tent overnight. So the best thing is to have one person wake up and kind of try and scrape the frost off the inside of your tent and dispose of it before everybody else gets up. Otherwise, you just start a snowstorm inside the tent. And of course, the minute the sun hits that tent, all that frost will melt and everything starts to drip, which is why we've got Matt on mopping duty, trying to catch the drips before they end up on our gear. On both these trips, we kind of mixed and matched with fuel. I don't think one is better than the other. Gas cylinders, nice and easy and clean, but you are now stuck with the empty gas canisters. Liquid fuel, cheap, but it does flare, which is always interesting inside a tent, because we're cooking in the bell of the tent. So we did both. They both worked. Navigation is interesting, particularly if you come from Britain and you're used to Ordnance Survey mapping. Canadian maps are a pale comparison to anything you get in the UK. They really aren't very good. It is, after all, an incredibly big country with very few people. So we managed to track down what paper maps were available. And we had copies of those with us. I also then took scans of the paper maps. And this is a thing you can do. You can import them into Google Earth. Then you lay the paper map scan over the Google Earth satellite imagery. And you carefully sit there and try and match up known features, summits of mountains, whatever you've got that lets you position. And then you can embed. So your paper map is now embedded into Google Earth's GPS information. And this map can then be exported to your GPS. So you now have on your GPS enabled, the same paper map that you're using. Now that's actually really useful. It takes a bit of tech ability to do this, although I'm not the world's most techie person. If you're into this, it's really actually quite interesting getting it to work. And it really was quite useful on both trips to have GPS versions of these paper maps. We used the Garmin GPS Map 64s because they have complete button control. You don't have to try and do touchscreen control while wearing incredibly thick gloves. They're also Bluetooth enabled, so they could talk to each other. We could put a track on one and send it to the other, or vice versa, which was useful. If one team went out and went somewhere and ran a track, they could then share that track with the rest of the team. Nevertheless, it's always annoying. As usual, you're sitting there with your big ski goggles on and you can't see the screen of your GPS, even with the buttons. I ended up taking my gloves off because I just got so annoyed. And it's really hard going if you're wearing mitts. It's all, relatively complicated. So, what actually happened on the Steele expedition? The answer is not a lot. We skied around quite a lot. We got to the top of one single peak, our first acclimatization peak. And we didn't know at the time, but that was that. Our next plan had been to try and do some or all of Mount Walsh as an acclimatization peak, but they'd had an incredibly dry winter. They hadn't had all that much snowfall, relatively, for Canada. And there were crevasses. There were open crevasses everywhere. We just couldn't see a safe way through onto the upper slopes of Mount Walsh. And where we couldn't see crevasses, we could see blue ice. And we had come with ski gear, not with alpine climbing gear. Yes, we had crampons and basic ice axes, but we weren't equipped to start doing proper technical alpine ice climbing. So we gave up on Mount Walsh. We made our way up towards Steele. Over there behind Susie on the left is Mount Luciana. One of the things people have done is done a traverse from Steele, which is out of the photo on the right, all the way along that skyline ridge to Mount Luciana. But that's a big couple of days of climbing. And this was our main objective, the southeast face of Mount Steele. And although the photograph doesn't show it that clearly, there's a lot of blue ice on there, and there are a lot of open crevasses. And once again, we just looked at that and went, we aren't going to be able to skin our way up that. And the big chunks of it, we don't think we're going to be able to ski back down. This is back to being essentially an alpine climbing objective, not a ski mountaineering objective. And we backed off. We decided we just didn't have the equipment for it. We did think about some other plans, but those mountains are so far apart that you have to skin for so many days to get to the foot of another mountain before you can even work out whether it's skiable. We basically didn't have any other objectives that we could try. So we skied ourselves back to our pickup spot and promptly got snowed in. And this is less fun than it sounds. You can't go for a walk because there's no visibility and there are crevasses outside your, marked camping area. And the pilots are sitting there saying, we will fly as soon as we get a gap. We have got teams all over the ice cap, a lot of teams on Logan, and we will get to you when we get to you, and you have got to be ready. So you're kind of sitting there semi-packed, waiting. And this went on for about 2.5 days, which is boring as hell, before they finally managed to get into us and pull the team out. So that was Mount Steele, not the world's most interesting ski expedition, which is why we're going to go back in time to the thoroughly interesting expedition from a couple of years earlier, which was that monster over there, which is Mount Logan. So this is a photograph taken from the Steele expedition looking across onto Mount Logan. Now, Mount Logan is quite a mountain. This is the highest peak in Canada. It is the second highest in North America, just under 6,000 meters high. And it is the most enormous cake of a mountain. Supposedly, it's the biggest base circumference of anything that is non-volcanic. I've been told that if you wanted to ski tour like all the way around the base of Logan, which you could do, it's likely to take you 2 weeks. It's just that far. So Logan is particularly famous for the Hummingbird Ridge, which is ridiculously tricky and difficult. It has another ridge called the Warbler Ridge. And you sit there on this giant ice cap and think, they were getting a bit fanciful. Why are you calling your ridge after hummingbirds and warblers? Well, because we're not that far from the sea. And these little birds do actually turn up. Those ridges were named after birds that were seen on the expeditions. And we had one little one, this fat little, palm-sized intrepid explorer who turned up on one of the trips. So this is the Mount Logan expedition. It was the brainchild of Phil Jardine. And we've got 6 of us. Again, it's an Eagles expedition trip. Now, we're doing Mount Logan by the standard route, which is called the King's Trench. And it is pretty much a trench. It is a long, long valley that leads into the mountain. It means you don't have to deal with any of those desperate ridges. And it's pretty much, I think, the only way that you can effectively do Logan on skis. And you want to do Logan on skis. It is enormous. There are a few people there on snowshoes. It's a very bad idea. So we are flying into the base camp. Logan is so high they don't fly over it. They fly the little plane all the way around it. Those crevasses, we are going to have to find a way through because we're going to have to ski our way up towards the King's Trench. Same protocol as on Steele. The first thing you do is you bury food. A nice big stash of food in case the plane cannot come in to get you. And then we start making our way up towards the King's Trench. Now, on this trip, we did a slightly different way of moving loads. We made sleds. I think this is an origin. It may be a Dave Wynne Jones invention. The sleds were put together by Dave Williams, who's very much enjoys this kind of DIY challenge. So these are kids' plastic sleds. The piping is super lightweight plumber's plastic piping. And then you've got thin, climbing cord running through the pipes. I don't know which one I prefer. This is slightly more rigid. It's a bit more stable. You have less of a problem with the sled sliding sideways when you're on a camber, although it will happen. Gravity always wins if the slope is steep enough. When it comes to skiing back down, obviously you've got a much bigger thing, although it turned out not to be terribly difficult to just tie an empty sled onto your rucksack and carry it that way. When it comes to skiing back down when they're loaded, again, not that bad. The trick turned out to be to put as much weight as you could into your rucksack and then actually ski with the sled on one side, holding onto your pipe structure. I actually found this a reasonable way to ski with the sled. We're not the only team on Logan. So Logan is relatively popular, but it's nothing like Denali. Where there might be in a season 100 climbers, skiers on Logan, there are going to be well over 1,000 on Denali. Denali is now a real hotspot mountain. It is, of course, one of the 7 summits. So we came across a few other teams on Logan, but it has much more feel of like an old-fashioned mountain where there's a lot of mountain and very few people. These teams were ahead of us by a day or two, which was quite useful because the most technical part of the King's Trench ascent is this icefall. And the teams ahead of us had already found a way through, which we simply used. That did make our life easier. Although it's not very long, you can get through it in somewhere between 1 to 2 hours of skinning. and, pretty much in about 20 minutes of skiing back down. It's got some big features which could detach and fall on your head. And it's got some big crevasses. People have fallen into crevasses, broken through snow bridges in the King's Trench icefall. So you do need to take this seriously as you go through it. And then it just got grim. Again, the temperatures just weren't what we expected. It's ridiculously hot. We're at 4,500 meters. Everybody's down to their base layer, sweating buckets, headaches from the heat. And this is where you're now being affected by the altitude, this horrible endless slope with your sled pulling to one side just hour after hour after hour. This was a pretty grim day. Because we are double loading on Logan, we've got quite a lot of equipment. What we would do is go up with a load of equipment, dig a cache, bury it, ski back to our tent. The next day, we would pack up the camp and move the camp up to the cache, set up the tents again, new campsite. So that gave us a chance to acclimatize. It also gave us a way to move the equipment bit by bit. It also gave us what, frankly, is the best skiing, because after the cache days, you got to ski back down without any weight. And that's where we actually had the most enjoyable, proper skiing. Particularly up here, this is sort of coming down from the camps up at 4,600, 4,800 meters. And of course, skiing back down through the icefall, which gave us some of our steepest skiing. So it's not really a trip where you're going there to be a free rider. We're using skis to cover ground, to climb the mountain. And there's a lot of ground to cover. This is a big, big mountain. In that one in the distance, there it is closer in, with a giant crevasse in front of us. That one in the distance is Mount St. Elias. I believe that is the biggest kind of direct start at the sea, end up on the peak of the mountain anywhere in the world, because it is literally pretty much on the edge of the sea. And you can ski Mount St. Elias, although I think it's quite technical. One of the most amusing things that happened to us, as I said, there were some other teams on the mountain. We aren't the only people to be doing the move up ahead, cache equipment, come back down principle. And an American team, one of their people fell into a crevasse in the icefall. And they were all very shocked by this and decided collectively to give up and go home. But they had already cached equipment and they had no intention of going back to collect it. So they gave us the GPS coordinates of their cache. So we get up above the King's Trench icefall. So this is, I don't know, maybe our fourth camp. I've kind of forgotten. And we've got these coordinates and we go looking and, we're expecting to find, a few horrible packets of dehydrated mountain food. No, these people had been to the most astonishing shop in Whitehorse, which we didn't go to. We visited it. We looked around, realized we couldn't afford it, and went away to a nice cheap supermarket and brought standard cheap expedition food. But this place was cheeses flown in from Europe and the finest dried meats from North America. And these Americans had bought themselves what was effectively the most astonishing charcuterie board worth of dried meat and exotic European cheeses and crackers, the whole thing. I don't know why they decided this was good expedition food, but we liked it. We ended up with this astonishing smorgasbord of charcuterie, which we then got to eat at like 4,600 meters on the side of Logan. Above this camp, we put in one more. And this became a camp where we had to make some tough decisions. That gives a little context to this. This is the classic, all the work that goes into finding yourself a flat spot on the side of a slopey mountain to put up these two big tents. And we know we've got some bad weather coming in. So we're expecting we're going to need some kind of walls for wind shelter. It's worth remembering that behind every camp is a lot of time just spent melting snow. No running water, obviously. So every drink, every piece of cooking, snow has had to be reduced down to your water. So there's our nice little camp. We've gone quite big on digging in our shelter. Beautiful views, but we know the bad weather is coming in. And we pretty much get pinned down for the next 2 to 3 days. Long enough to spend a fair amount of time digging that snow out from round the tents. You can see Dave simply throwing the snow up into the air, and the wind is just going to take it. It's hard to kind of convey how strongly the wind is blowing right now. But our big problem was deciding, given that our hot spell seemed to have ended and it had now gone windy and very cold, and our stable sun had sort of buggered off. Our big problem was working out what to do next. Because this is the reason why Mount Logan has a fairly ferocious reputation. Some routes are very difficult, like the Hummingbird Ridge, but the King's Trench is relatively straightforward. But the problem is this. So we've been coming up from the left. So, okay, we're at our 4th camp. The King's Trench brings you up to the wrong end of the astonishing cake plateau that is Mount Logan. Once we get up onto the top, we've still got to skin a straight line 12 kilometers to get to the summit. And the trouble is that you've got to go over a 5,500 meter pass and then drop back down. So normally on a mountain, if things are going wrong, you put your skis on and you just drop. You lose altitude as fast as you can, and that gets you to more oxygen and out of the wind and better weather conditions. And, you know, it's a way of getting out quickly. But Logan doesn't allow you to do that. You're stuck on this gigantic plateau where the wind is absolutely howling. And you've got to climb over a 5,500 meter pass before you can start to just ski down. Interestingly, since we went to Logan, they have made winter expeditions illegal. You cannot go into the Kluane National Park in winter. I think they just feel they can't manage to do rescues. I mean, it's very, very hard to get any kind of plane up onto that plateau or helicopter to do any kind of a rescue. So we spent quite a lot of time debating whether we thought the weather was stable enough to cross that pass and go onto the giant summit plateau. In the end, 4 of the 6 of us decided we wanted to push on. But we do know that we've got a relatively narrow weather window and we need to keep moving. So as the weather improves a bit, we head off over the pass. This becomes our camp on the plateau. We've taken just one tent, which makes for fairly cozy living. Though those orange tents next to us, a couple of plucky people on snowshoes, don't go on snowshoes. It just takes so long. You really, really, really want to be on skis. So yes, 4 of us, which makes for a very cozy night in our tent, but quite fun. And an early morning start. The weather is good, but we know it's not going to stay good. We are chasing a front as we move up. Astonishing views. Now we're seeing a piece of the ice cap we haven't seen before. And it just goes on and on and on. Amazing place. Cold, windy, jackets on, hoods up, goggles on. And if you look at that snow, sastrugi, this is not particularly nice snow. Crusty with these hard-edged sastrugi. And we are going to get to know those sastrugi well later on, because we kind of lose the race to the summit with the weather. By the time we get to the top, the view is gone, the cloud has come in. We take a photograph on a piece of snow with a piece of cloud behind us. We could be anywhere, but we are in fact on the summit of Logan. It is a fairly narrow ridge with a reasonably clearly defined little summit and these incredible ridges dropping straight off down the side. And then we had to get back to the camp and we could see nothing. We spent the next 6 hours skiing back down on compass bearings in a snowplow, which is horrible because you couldn't see the sastrugi either. So your snowplow was endlessly slamming into those horrible edges, which would catch your shins or catching the tips of your skis or thumping your way up and down and over these sastrugi, and using a combination of compass to hold the bearing while we ski and the GPS to work out the next section of the bearing. And we got down in good order. It was just sort of teeth gritted, not terribly fun. We got down in good order, but there was no sign of those snowshoers, because even snowplowing, you go down a lot faster than somebody on snowshoes. And by the time it had got dark late in the evening, we heard them or saw their head torches. I don't remember. And actually got our head torches out, guided them into our tents. We already had the stoves on, and they were absolutely shattered. They had been out there for so long, and we gave them hot drinks and some food before they then staggered on to their own tents. And then the following day, you climb all the way back up, which is not what you want to do, over that 5,500 meter pass. And then it's the long ski, this time fully loaded, because everything is coming down with us. It's the long ski all the way back down. 2 days to ski down to base camp, and the cloud is in and the planes aren't flying. Now, we were okay with this. We were okay with this because we had left the most ridiculous amount of food at base camp. So we basically just got thoroughly comfortably settled in and made the most astonishing fry-ups. We had bread and oil and eggs and sausage. And we just spent our time basically sitting there stuffing our faces. What was relatively amusing was, while we were on the mountain, a big commercial Mountain Madness team had come in, and they had just arrived. So they'd managed to get I don't know, about half of their team had been flown into base camp, and then the weather changed. So the other half of their team is trapped back at the airstrip. So the people who are at base camp can't start the expedition because the other half of the team isn't there yet. And these were wealthy commercial clients. They were quite clearly Silicon Valley executives. And they'd made themselves a circular track around their tents. Because, of course, crevasses, you can't just go off skiing because you're bored. And the clients were out there marching their way round this track. You could just see they'd been in the gym back in Seattle for months for their major mountain expedition, getting more and more annoyed and more cross that they weren't allowed to climb the mountain because the rest of the team hadn't arrived and it wasn't good enough and where were the planes and blah, blah, blah. And we just sat there and stuffed our faces with eggs and bacon and were amused. And the weather cleared and the rest of the Seattle team got flown in and we got flown out. And that was the end of a thoroughly successful expedition. It's an amazing place, this ice field, these mountains. It has its drawbacks. The mountains are so far apart that it's very difficult to be kind of adaptable and switch out one mountain for another. If your objective doesn't work, your trip is kind of over. You are fairly reliant on the plains, although it's pretty spectacular being flown in and just dropped off on a glacier like this. But as a place to see the ice fall, to be on these mountains, to see the views, it is an astonishing place to go skiing. Right. A question from Richard. The two expeditions were a few years ago. Would you do anything different now? The most obvious one is we took too much food. I am going to throw Phil under the bus very slightly. He's not here this evening, so I think I can get away with it. Phil kind of decided we should cater as if we were going to the Arctic. And I looked at this and thought, this is a lot of food. It's way more than I would take if I was doing a climbing expedition in the Himalaya. But nevertheless, I thought, yeah, but what if I'm the only person who hasn't brought enough food and everybody else is eating food and I'm sitting there with my one hopeless little energy bar starving? So I kind of succumbed to Phil's nutritional plan, and it was ridiculous. This is not like pulling sleds on a pulling expedition to the South Pole. This is much more like a Himalayan climbing trip. And we just had way too much food, particularly on Logan. We gave it away, we stashed it, we ate huge amounts of it at base camp. It was completely over the top. Other than that, wider skis. That horrible crusty stuff is just easier. The skis now are wider and lighter, so I definitely go on wider skis. I don't know if anything much has changed in terms of tech. Obviously, we've now got better options in terms of combining your InReach with your Garmin for communication. But beyond that, I think it's pretty much the same. Question from Robert. Deep winter? No. Oh, no. I would imagine that the Yukon is absolutely awful in deep winter. The amount of snow, the amount of cold, the wind must be epic. I doubt they fly the planes. And in fact, as I mentioned, you're not allowed to go climbing in the Kluane National Park in the middle of winter. I think they think it's just too dangerous. But the timing is quite interesting because they also have a climate change problem. The snow gets very soft late in the season, so they can't land the planes. If you stay in there too close to summer, they can't pick you up because they risk getting bogged into soft, melting, waterlogged snow and not being able to take off. So you've got a relatively narrow window, which is basically April and May, which is the season. And that's that. So that's when you go. Air temperature on top of Logan. It wasn't terrible. I'm going to be guessing. It was cold enough that I put on my 8,000 meter jacket, but not everyone was wearing their huge down puffies. So I would guess minus 15, something like that. But I mean, the wind was up, but it wasn't howling. I would imagine when the wind really gets going, yeah, you wouldn't want to be there. David asking if anyone got frostnip or frostbite. No. And again, it was mostly warmer than we expected. The first half of Logan, it was hot. We were slogging along. We were sweating. It wasn't fun. And even we didn't ski on any incredibly windy days. We stayed in camp. So no problems with frostnip or frostbite. Very remote, yes. It is very remote. Gear failure, yes. But I mean, this is the same as any remote expedition. You know, some of the expeditions into the remote Indian Himalaya or, you know, Himalayan climbing expeditions, you need to have a pretty good repair kit with you. Again, this is one of the advantages of doing something where you can pull the pulks. You can take a little bit of extra so that you have a solid repair kit with you. Boots, Brent, yes. Overboots, gaiters. Yes, we took them. Mostly we didn't need them. We went all in. So people got, you know, bigger ski boots. They got the super, you know, Canadian super thick inners, and then the thermal soles inside them. And then I got the 40 below overboots. And mostly my feet were just hot and sweaty. Again, it wasn't as cold as kind of the reputation of Logan. And I do think, speaking not as a Canadian, just as a visitor, that the climate has shifted. Everything is just somewhat warmer than it used to be. Planning. How was this coordinated? The time period. So Tim's question, with regard to planning, how was this coordinated? And what is the time period between initiating the plan and setting off? So Logan, which is the first of these two trips, was Phil Jardine's idea, and he had it in mind for years. So he'd been thinking about it for a very long time before he finally put it on the Eagles schedule and pulled together a team. In terms of the pulling together of the team, so this as an expedition, I think this was announced earlier than the usual, you know, when are the tours released. I think we may have had a year's warning that this expedition was going to be on the list for 2016. So those of us who came onto the trip, you know, had a good 6 or 8 months worth to think about. But in the end, there's only so much you can do. You know, there's only so much gear you can take. You take your skis, you take a tent, you get some warm clothing together. Because I'd done Himalayan 8,000 meter climbing, I pretty much had the gear, and I was able to lend gear to some other people who hadn't been into situations that were quite that cold before. Steele was Jack Waters' trip. Jack lives in Seattle, so this is pretty much his extended backyard. Howard was on that trip as well. Susie, they'd done a lot of skiing in Canada. And then I was on it, having been on the Logan trip. So Steele, we had a lot of people with quite a lot of experience, so we could pull that trip together fairly quickly. Patrick, I'm going to come back to your question. Tim, Mount St. Elias, is it on the bucket list? I don't think so. The things I've seen and read, Mount St. Elias looks difficult. I see Brent nodding. Brent, I might come back to you in just a minute on that one. No, actually, let's do it now. I'll come to Patrick later. Brent, do you want to chip in? You might know more than I do, but from what I've seen, Mount St. Elias looks hard.
Well, it was originally this idea that you'd have the highest vertical interval, as you pointed out, from the summit to the sea. But of course, you've got to get it in condition. And if it's condition at sea level, it might not be in condition up high. And there are various attempts, and people have got closer and closer to it, even getting to the base of the mountain. And then the mountain is not easy. It is not easy. If you look at it, there's down climbing and rappelling on it. If you do your homework and see what people have done. And I've looked at it a long time ago. I looked at all of those mountains and decided probably it was better to go to Greenland, because you had a better chance of having that kind of fun without any of the serious downsides of there was a rescue off Mount Logan, a helicopter rescue for people who've been trapped between the south summit and the proper summit for 4 or 5 days fortunately in a snow hole. They found a crevasse snow hole, but they were rescued by a helicopter, and it had to come from the Rockies down south. They had to fly the helicopter. Just mind-blowingly difficult and remote. And of course, because it's where it is, and the altitude, the combination of the altitude is the weather, and you're so exposed because you're out for 10 days, and you're not gonna, it's just that. Another top little tip is with building a wall around the tent. There's 2 alternatives. You build a wall around the tent. What it means is that the wall creates a lee. So the wind comes and drops the snow. But what it does is it protects. Otherwise, your tent is going like this all night. You don't sleep, and you're worried it's going to weigh. So you just have to dig yourself out. I got a tent where the photograph shows a person unzipping and reaching out with the shovel, and so that it was right up almost at the top of the door, drifted in. But it sort of is insulation, and it keeps the wind off. So it's literally a swinging roundabout. When you build the wall, the wind comes, and then it's the lee, it drops down and creates the drift.
Thank you. Yes, that's kind of what we found. For people who don't know, Brent has done 2 webinars for us before, one about Canada and one about Greenland. So if you're interested in these areas, those are on the Eagle Ski Club YouTube channel, and they're both very good talks. So it's great to have you here, Brent. And right, I'll pick up this last question from Patrick. This might not be a simple question to answer, but as a humble alpine ski tourer, the Alps have got plenty to do. And new to the Eagle Ski Club, well, welcome to the club, Patrick. We're delighted to have you. Where would I start if I wanted to try something like this? That's a very good question, and it's one that the club has tried to address. How do you make the jump between hut-to-hut touring in the Alps, which, despite all the risks and challenges of the Alps, does feel fairly contained, and expedition skiing where you're taking out tents? So 2 years ago, for example, the club put on a training trip to Georgia, organized by Susie, led by one of our guides. And they spent 2 weeks in Georgia, tent camping, learning some of the various skills that might go into this. So that's one possibility, is to look out for that kind of thing. We have also, over the course of our webinars, run various about the Eagle Ski Club expedition trips. There's some stuff by Dave Wynne-Jones you'll find on the YouTube channel. He's talked about expeditioning, and he actually wrote a book, I think, called The Expedition Handbook, which has got some solid tips for somebody who wants to start to think about ski expeditions. The next thing to do, I guess, is to, in the Alps, you can start doing winter room type of tours. So you're going in more challenging weather, you're carrying more of your own equipment. That's a kind of an intermediate step. And then look out for who in the club is potentially offering expedition trips. I noticed we haven't had one for the last couple of years. We've all got lazy. The people with the experience, nobody is actually putting their hands up to lead an expedition trip. But hopefully that will change. So keep an eye out for trips while building up your experience in Europe. Or finally, there's a lot of experience. Put on your own and talk to people who are in the club. There are places you can go that are sort of tent-based expeditioning. Kyrgyzstan is one, for example, but where you're not committing yourself to something quite as massively remote and weather-bound as Mount Logan and up in the Yukon. So talk to people in the club. There's actually a lot of experience among climbers and skiers.
Col de Lautrec is a place that people for, I think, Antarctic expeditions used to practice there, because you can get up on the road and you can go up and you're not very far from anywhere. You go out and dig a snow hole and you can do it a couple of days in a tent if you wanted to check all your gear.
Indeed, there's plenty of wild places in the Alps. We've got guides who'd be prepared to put on, get together a group of friends, get together a training week where you go and do snow holes and winter camping in the Alps. There are various ways you can start to build experience towards a trip like this. And there are a lot of resources in the club, one way and another. The thing to do is just to start talking to people. So if you're coming, Patrick, if you're coming to the Arolla meet, introduce yourself to me and to other people and start getting to know people in the club. Right, I think I've got one final question, which was Tim's. Acclimatization was just the skiing enough? Yes, because we're effectively just doing classic mountaineering acclimatization, but on skis. Up you go, dump a load, down you come, sleep the night. Move your camp. Up you go, sleep at a new height. Up you go, down you come. Second night, up you go, stay up, and on you go. With our highest camp being just over 5,000 meters. And obviously, there are always going to be a couple of days in there for bad weather, which will help to solidify your acclimatization.